Maid spent 6 years taking care of Millionaire. What he did after recovering shocked her. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew the moment she stepped through those towering oak doors that this job would break her, or rebuild her entirely. Aurora Bennett adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag as she stood in the marble foyer of the Hayes mansion. At 31, she had seen enough broken people to recognize the sound of a house holding its breath. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, thick with unspoken grief and abandoned dreams. "Miss Bennett," a sharp voice cut through the quiet. "Mrs. Whitmore, the estate manager, appeared from behind a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than Aurora's entire year's salary. "Mr. Hayes is waiting." Aurora nodded, her dark eyes taking in the surroundings. Expensive paintings hung crooked on the walls, as if no one cared enough to straighten them anymore. Dust particles danced in the afternoon light, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't just a house. It was a museum of a life that used to matter. "Before we go up, Mrs. Whitmore continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "you need to understand something. Mr. Hayes isn't the man he used to be. The accident changed everything. He barely speaks. When he does, it's usually to dismiss people." "How many caregivers has he had?" Aurora asked, already suspecting the answer. "You're number 14 in 2 years. Mrs. Whitmore's expression softened slightly. "The longest anyone stayed was 3 months. Most don't make it past 2 weeks. They climbed a sweeping staircase that curved like a question mark. Aurora's sneakers squeaked against the polished marble, a sound that seemed almost rebellious in this temple of silence. She thought about her sister Melody, probably getting home from high school right now, heating up leftover pizza and wondering if Aurora would make enough money this time to keep the lights on. The master bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Mrs. Whitmore knocked gently. "Mr. Hayes, your new caregiver is here." No response. Mrs. Whitmore pushed the door open, revealing a room that felt more like a medical facility than a bedroom. Hospital equipment hummed quietly in corners. Prescription bottles lined a mahogany nightstand like plastic soldiers. And there, positioned near the window overlooking the estate's sprawling gardens, sat a man in a wheelchair with his back to them. "Mr. Hayes, this is Aurora Bennett. She comes highly recommended." James Hayes didn't turn around. Aurora could see only the back of his head, thick dark hair that needed cutting, shoulders that once carried the weight of a business empire now slumped in defeat. He wore a navy blue sweater that hung loose on his frame, and his hands rested motionless on the wheelchair's armrests. "Leave us," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Whitmore hesitated. "Sir, perhaps I should—" "Leave. Us." Each word fell like a stone into still water. The estate manager shot Aurora an apologetic look and retreated, closing the door with a soft click that seemed to echo forever. Aurora stood there for a moment, studying the man who would either become her salvation or her biggest mistake. She'd read his file on the bus ride over. James Hayes, 38, former CEO of Hayes International Logistics. Before the accident, he'd been featured on magazine covers, photographed at galas with supermodels and politicians. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Single-car crash on the Pacific Coast Highway. No alcohol involved, just a moment of distraction that changed everything. She moved around the wheelchair to face him, and for the first time, their eyes met. What she saw there took her breath away, not because of his striking features, though he was undeniably handsome, even with the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. It was the emptiness in his green eyes that made her chest tighten. This wasn't just a man who couldn't walk. This was a man who had forgotten how to live. "Hello, James," she said softly, using his first name instead of the formal address Mrs. Whitmore had suggested. "I'm Aurora." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You can call me Mr. Hayes, and your job is simple. Keep me alive and keep me comfortable. Nothing more, nothing less. Don't try to be my friend. Don't try to cheer me up, and for God's sake, don't try to save me." Aurora nodded slowly, setting her bag down near the door. "Understood. Good." He turned his chair back toward the window, dismissing her. "Your quarters are in the East Wing. Mrs. Whitmore will show you." But Aurora didn't leave. Instead, she walked to the window and stood beside his chair, looking out at the same view he'd been staring at. The gardens were overgrown, wild roses climbing over carefully planned hedges, like nature was reclaiming what had been abandoned. "Those roses are beautiful," she murmured. James's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "I said you could go." Aurora turned to look at him, her dark eyes gentle but unwavering. "I know what you said, but I was thinking someone should probably trim them before winter comes. Roses don't like being ignored." She headed toward the door, but paused with her hand on the handle. Neither do people. The last thing she heard before closing the door was the sharp intake of his breath, and Aurora realized something that would change everything. James Hayes wasn't angry at the world. He was terrified of it. What would you do if you walked into someone's life when they had completely given up on living? Would you respect their walls, or gently tear them down? Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been Aurora trying to reach someone who had shut out the world? Aurora learned that silence could be a weapon on her very first night in the Hayes mansion. She lay awake in the East Wing quarters, a space larger than her entire apartment back in downtown Seattle, listening to the house breathe around her. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows, seemed amplified in the darkness. But it was the sound she couldn't hear that kept her staring at the ceiling. James. At 3:17 a.m. she finally heard it, a muffled cry, followed by the mechanical whir of his wheelchair moving across hardwood floors. Aurora slipped from her bed and padded barefoot down the hallway. Through James's partially open door she could see him positioned near the window again, his silhouette rigid against the moonlit glass. His shoulders were shaking. She should have gone back to her room. Should have respected his privacy. Should have remembered his words about not trying to save him. Instead, she knocked gently. "Go away," came his hoarse whisper. "Can't do that," Aurora replied softly. "It's my job to make sure you're comfortable." "You don't sound comfortable." A bitter laugh escaped him. "My job description probably didn't mention the nightmares, did it?" Aurora pushed the door open slightly. Actually, it did. Page 2, paragraph 3. Right between assist with daily hygiene and monitor medication schedule. That earned her a glance over his shoulder, the first time he'd voluntarily looked at her since their introduction. "You read the fine print?" "I always read the fine print." Aurora stepped into the room, maintaining a respectful distance. "My mama used to say that's where people hide their truths." James turned his chair to face her fully. In the moonlight, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the way his hands trembled slightly from whatever had pulled him from sleep. "Your mama sounds wise." She was. Aurora's voice carried a gentle sadness. "She died when I was 22. Breast cancer. I took care of her for 2 years before she couldn't fight anymore." Something shifted in James's expression. The carefully constructed walls flickered just for a moment. "I'm sorry. Thank you." Aurora moved to the window, looking out at the same overgrown garden. She used to have nightmares too. Toward the end, used to wake up thinking she was late for work, or that she'd forgotten to pick me up from school, or— Aurora paused. "Or that she was falling and couldn't stop." James's wheelchair moved closer. "Not much, but enough." "Is that what you dream about?" Aurora asked quietly. "Falling?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. "I dream about walking," James finally admitted, his voice barely audible. "Every night I dream I can walk. I run through this house, down to the garden, out to the ocean, and then I wake up and remember." He gestured at his legs with a mixture of anger and resignation. "This." Aurora turned to look at him. "That must be the cruelest kind of torture." "It is." His green eyes met hers. "For 6 seconds every morning I forget. I try to get out of bed like I used to. And then reality crashes down all over again." They stood in comfortable silence, two wounded souls recognizing something familiar in each other. "The accident," Aurora ventured. "Do you want to talk about it?" James's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "What's to talk about? One moment I was driving home from a board meeting thinking about quarterly projections and merger possibilities. The next moment I woke up in a hospital bed with doctors explaining words like permanent and paralysis and adjustment period. That's not what I meant." James frowned. "What did you mean?" "I meant the part you don't tell anyone. The part that happened right before." Something dangerous flickered across his features. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not." Aurora's voice remained gentle, unthreatened by his sudden coldness. "But I know that accidents don't usually happen to careful people on straight roads during clear weather, and I know that successful men don't usually end up completely alone after something like this, unless they were already alone before it happened." James's breathing became shallow. "You need to stop." "Your fiancée," Aurora continued quietly. "Cassandra Winters. I saw the engagement photo still on your dresser, but Mrs. Whitmore mentioned she left right after the accident." That's not typical behavior for someone who was planning to spend their life with you. Stop. And your business partners bought you out for a fraction of what your shares were worth. Your friends stopped visiting after the first month. Your own family lives 3 states away and hasn't been here in— I said stop! James's voice cracked like a whip through the room. But Aurora didn't flinch. Instead, she moved closer to his chair and knelt down so they were eye level. James, she said softly, what were you running from that night? For a moment she thought he might answer. His eyes filled with something raw and desperate, and his mouth opened as if words were fighting to escape. Then the walls slammed back up. Get out, he whispered. James, get out! The words exploded from him with such force that a picture frame fell from the nightstand, glass scattering across the floor. Aurora stood slowly, her heart breaking for this man who was drowning in secrets. She walked to the door but paused before leaving. You know what I think, she said, without turning around. I think you're not afraid of being broken. You're afraid of being fixed. She closed the door gently behind her, leaving James alone with the shattered glass and the truth he wasn't ready to face. But as Aurora walked back to her room, she didn't see James reach down and carefully pick up one of the glass shards, turning it over in his palm like he was trying to remember what it felt like to bleed, or how, for the first time in 2 years, he was wondering if someone might actually stay long enough to see him put the pieces back together. The next morning arrived with the kind of awkward tension that makes coffee taste bitter and silence feel heavy. Aurora knocked on James's door at exactly 8 a.m., carrying his breakfast tray with the same professional composure she'd maintained with 13 other clients. But her hands trembled slightly as she balanced the silver service, not from nerves, but from the memory of glass shards and unspoken truths. Come in, his voice called, carefully neutral. She entered to find James positioned at his desk, laptop open, wearing a crisp white button-down shirt that made him look every inch the CEO he used to be. His hair was combed, his jaw freshly shaved. He'd rebuilt his armor overnight. Good morning, Aurora said, setting the tray on the small table near the window. Steel-cut oats with fresh berries, whole grain toast and coffee, black, no sugar. Thank you. 2 words, polite, distant, professional. Aurora began arranging his medications in the daily pill organizer, a routine she'd memorized from the detailed care plan Mrs. Whitmore had provided. Blood pressure medication at 8 a.m., pain management at noon and 6 p.m., sleep aid as needed. The physical therapist will be here at 10, she continued, checking items off her mental list. Dr. Hoffman called yesterday to confirm your appointment Thursday at 2 p.m., and your lawyer, Mr. Brennan, left 3 messages about some contracts that need reviewing. James nodded without looking up from his screen. Fine. Aurora finished with the medications and moved to adjust the blinds, letting more morning light into the room. As she reached across his desk, she caught a glimpse of his laptop screen, financial reports, stock portfolios, acquisition proposals. Even paralyzed, James Hayes was still trying to conquer the business world from his bedroom. You know, Aurora said casually, there's a whole world outside this room. I'm aware. When's the last time you left this house? James's fingers paused over the keyboard. I leave when necessary. Medical appointments. I meant for pleasure, fresh air, change of scenery. This conversation is unnecessary. Aurora walked to the window overlooking the garden. The morning sun illuminated the wild roses she'd mentioned yesterday, their blooms bright against the overgrown hedges. My sister Melody called last night, she said, seemingly changing the subject. She's 17, thinks she knows everything. Yesterday she informed me that I have a savior complex. Despite himself, James glanced up. Do you? Aurora smiled softly. Probably. It runs in the family. My mama used to bring home stray cats, injured birds, neighborhood kids who needed feeding. Our apartment was like a revolving door of broken things she thought she could fix. And did she? Fix them? Sometimes. Aurora turned from the window. Sometimes she just loved them while they figured out how to fix themselves. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that neither acknowledged directly. James closed his laptop with more force than necessary. Miss Bennett? Aurora. Miss Bennett, he continued firmly. I appreciate your dedication, but I need to be clear about something. I'm not a stray cat. I'm not a project. I'm a man who needs medical care and basic assistance, nothing more. Aurora nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right. James blinked, clearly expecting more of a fight. You're not a stray cat, Aurora continued. Stray cats eventually trust you enough to let you pet them. A sound escaped James, somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "You're impossible." "I've been told that before." Aurora moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, I almost forgot. I took the liberty of calling a landscaping service about the garden. They can start this afternoon if you approve." "Why would you do that?" "Because you stare at it for hours every day and it's dying." Seemed like a waste of a beautiful view. James's jaw tightened. "I didn't authorize any landscaping." "You're right. It's your property. Your decision." Aurora's voice remained pleasant, unbothered by his irritation. "I just thought, well, roses are hardy plants. They can survive almost anything if someone gives them a chance to bloom again." She was almost to the door when James spoke again. "Cancel the landscaping service." Aurora turned. "Of course, but..." James looked out at the garden, his expression unreadable. Maybe you could trim back the dead branches, just the dead ones." Something warm flickered in Aurora's chest. "Just the dead ones?" "Yes. And Aurora?" He used her first name for the first time, the syllables careful on his tongue. "Yes. Last night, what I said about getting out." James's hands fidgeted with a pen on his desk. "I didn't mean to yell." "I know. You do?" Aurora's smile was gentle but knowing. Caged animals always bite when someone first opens the door. It doesn't mean they don't want to be free. She left him sitting there, staring at the garden with an expression she couldn't quite read. But through the window, Aurora saw him lean forward slightly, his gaze following the path that wound through the overgrown roses toward the distant ocean. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Whitmore found Aurora in the supply closet, gathering gardening gloves and pruning shears. "Miss Bennet, what are you doing?" Aurora held up the tools with a smile that could have lit up the entire mansion. "Trimming dead branches." But what Mrs. Whitmore didn't see was James, still sitting at his desk, watching Aurora through the window as she knelt in the garden dirt, carefully examining each rosebush like she was looking for signs of life in something everyone else had given up for dead. And for the first time in 2 years, James Hayes found himself wondering what it would feel like to grow again. 3 weeks into their careful dance of professional boundaries and stolen moments, the storm arrived without warning. Aurora was in the kitchen preparing James's lunch when her phone buzzed against the granite countertop. The caller ID made her stomach drop. Lincoln High School. "Miss Bennet, this is Principal Davidson. I'm afraid we need you to come pick up your sister immediately." Aurora's hands went cold. "What happened? Is Melody hurt?" "She's not injured, but there was an incident. She was found with alcohol on school property. We need a guardian here within the hour, or we'll have to involve social services." The phone slipped from Aurora's numb fingers, clattering against the floor. "Aurora?" James's voice came from the doorway. She spun around to find him in his wheelchair, concern etched across his features. "What's wrong?" I have to go." Aurora's voice cracked as she bent to retrieve her phone. "My sister. There's been a problem at school and Breathe." James rolled closer. "Tell me what happened." Aurora tried to explain, but the words tumbled out in a panicked rush. Melody, alcohol, social services, the possibility of losing the only family she had left. "I have to go right now," Aurora said, already untying her apron. "I'll call Mrs. Whitmore to cover—" "No," James's voice was firm. "I'm coming with you." Aurora stared at him. "James, you don't understand. This isn't your problem. I can handle—" "When's the last time you drove?" The question stopped her cold. Aurora's old Honda had died 6 months ago, and she'd been taking the bus everywhere since. The Hayes mansion was 30 minutes outside the city, and the bus schedule would make her late. Too late. "I'll call a taxi," she said weakly. "That'll take too long." James was already moving toward the front door. "My car has hand controls, I can drive." "You haven't left this house in months." James paused at the threshold, his knuckles white on the wheelchair handles. For a moment Aurora saw the fear flicker across his face, the terror of facing the world beyond these walls. Then something stronger took its place. "Some things are more important than fear," he said quietly. 20 minutes later, they were speeding down Highway 101 in James's modified BMW, the Pacific Ocean flashing by on their left. Aurora sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. "Tell me about her," James said, his voice steady despite the fact that this was his first time driving since the accident. "Melody," Aurora's voice was barely a whisper. She's everything I have left. Smart as a whip, stubborn as a mule, wants to be a veterinarian, spends her free time volunteering at the animal shelter downtown. Doesn't sound like the type to get drunk at school." "She's not." Aurora stared out the window. But lately she's been different, angry, distant. I think she resents me for working so much, for not being around. I'm trying to save money for her college, but she just sees me leaving every morning and coming home exhausted every night. James navigated through city traffic with surprising skill, his hands sure on the modified controls. You're raising her alone? Since she was 12. Our parents died within 6 months of each other. Mama from cancer, Daddy from a heart attack that the doctors said was really just a broken heart. Aurora's voice caught. I was 24, barely keeping my own life together, and suddenly I had this grieving kid who needed everything from me. That's a lot of responsibility. It's not responsibility, Aurora said fiercely. It's love. She's my sister, my family. I'd do anything for her. James glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Even take a job taking care of a broken stranger. You're not a stranger anymore. The words hung between them as James pulled into the school parking lot. Lincoln High was a sprawling brick building that had seen better decades, surrounded by chain-link fencing and tired-looking teachers supervising afternoon detention. Inside Principal Davidson's office, Melody sat slumped in a plastic chair, her dark hair covering her face. At 17, she looked so much like Aurora that James felt a strange pang in his chest. Melody, Aurora said softly. The teenager looked up, and James saw Aurora's eyes staring back, except these were filled with defiance and pain instead of gentle strength. Don't, Melody said flatly. Just don't, okay? I know what you're gonna say. Principal Davidson cleared his throat. Miss Bennett, your sister was found with a flask of vodka in her locker during a random search. This is her first offense, so we're willing to consider suspension instead of expulsion, but it wasn't mine, Melody interrupted. Melody, Aurora started. It wasn't mine, Melody's voice cracked. It was for Trevor Hastings. His dad drinks, okay? Like, really drinks. And sometimes when it gets bad, Trevor crashes at our place, and I thought if I brought him some, maybe he wouldn't have to go home and deal with... She stopped, tears streaming down her face. Aurora was across the room in 2 steps, pulling her sister into her arms. Oh, baby, why didn't you tell me? Because you're never home, Melody sobbed into Aurora's shoulder. You're always at that stupid job taking care of some rich guy who probably doesn't even appreciate you, and I'm here dealing with everything alone. Over Melody's head, Aurora's eyes met James's. The guilt and exhaustion in her expression hit him like a physical blow. Miss Bennett, Principal Davidson said gently, we understand the circumstances, but policy is policy. Melody will need to serve a 3-day suspension, and we strongly recommend counseling. I'll pay for it, James said suddenly. Everyone turned to stare at him. The counseling, James continued, his voice steady. Whatever she needs, and if there are other students in similar situations, I'd like to fund a program. Kids shouldn't have to handle adult problems alone. Principal Davidson's eyebrows shot up. Sir, that's very generous, but... James, Aurora whispered. You don't have to. Yes, I do. James looked directly at her. You've been taking care of everyone else for so long, you forgot that sometimes people want to take care of you, too. The drive home was quiet, except for Melody's occasional sniffles from the back seat. As they pulled into the mansion's circular driveway, she finally spoke. Aurora, her voice was small, is this where you work? Yes. Melody stared up at the imposing structure. And he lets you bring home weird teenagers. James turned to face her, a slight smile playing at his lips. I let Aurora do whatever she thinks is right. She has excellent judgment. As they all sat in the car, watching the late afternoon sun paint the mansion's windows gold, Aurora realized something had fundamentally shifted. James had left his sanctuary, faced his fears, and chosen to help her family without hesitation. But more than that, for the first time in years, Aurora Bennett didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of the world alone. Thank you, she whispered to James. Don't thank me yet, he replied, his eyes twinkling with something she'd never seen before. Wait until you see what Melody thinks of the garden project. And as Aurora watched her sister's face light up at the mention of plants and growing things, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, they were all about to bloom together. 2 months had passed since the day everything changed, and the Hayes mansion no longer felt like a tomb. Aurora stood in the kitchen at dawn, preparing breakfast while listening to the unexpected sound of laughter drifting from the garden. Through the window, she could see Melody kneeling beside a freshly planted rose bush, chattering animatedly to James about soil pH levels and proper pruning techniques. Her sister had taken to spending weekends at the mansion, initially sullen about the arrangement, but gradually warming to both James and the therapeutic nature of gardening. "The damask roses are responding better than expected," Melody was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent the last 8 weeks researching everything about horticulture. "But the climbing variety near the east wall needs more nitrogen." James nodded seriously, as if 17-year-old Melody was a horticultural expert rather than a high school student who'd discovered her passion for growing things during her suspension. "What do you recommend?" "Compost tea and patience." Aurora smiled as she arranged James's morning medications. In the past 2 months, she'd watched her sister transform from an angry, lost teenager into someone with purpose and hope. More surprisingly, she'd watched James emerge from his self-imposed exile, spending hours outdoors despite his initial terror of being seen in his wheelchair. But it was the small moments that took Aurora's breath away. The way James had insisted on driving Melody to her counseling appointments, how he'd quietly arranged for her to shadow the veterinarian in town twice a week, the evening he'd spent 4 hours helping her with college application essays, treating her dreams with the same seriousness he'd once reserved for million-dollar business deals. "Aurora!" Melody's voice called from the garden. "Come see what we planted." Aurora carried James's breakfast tray outside, finding them both dirt-smudged and grinning beside a newly established herb garden. "Lavender for calming," Melody explained, pointing to small purple plants. "Rosemary for memory, and chamomile for—" She glanced at James with a mischievous smile. "For people who have trouble sleeping." James accepted his coffee with hands that no longer trembled during his nightmares, at least not as often. "Very subtle, Melody." "I learned from the best." Melody shot a meaningful look at Aurora. "My sister's the queen of taking care of people without them noticing." As they sat in comfortable companionship, Aurora felt a dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. This felt too much like family, too much like home, too much like something that could be taken away. "I should start lunch preparations," she said, standing abruptly. James caught her wrist gently. "Aurora, stay. I have responsibilities." "Stay." His green eyes held hers. "Please." So she stayed, and they talked about soil amendments and Melody's college prospects, and whether the climbing roses would reach the second-story windows by next spring. Normal conversations, family conversations. It wasn't until Melody went inside to wash up that James broached the subject Aurora had been dreading. "Dr. Hoffman called yesterday," he said quietly. Aurora's stomach clenched. Dr. Hoffman was James's neurologist, the man who'd been monitoring his recovery since the accident. "What did he say?" James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the roses they'd nurtured back to life. "He wants to try a new treatment protocol. Experimental nerve stimulation therapy, combined with an intensive physical rehabilitation program." "That's wonderful," Aurora said, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "It would mean 3 months at a specialized facility in Denver. 3 months of round-the-clock medical supervision and therapy." Aurora nodded, her throat tight. "When would you leave?" "I haven't decided if I'm going." She turned to stare at him. "James, if there's a chance—" "There's always a chance." His voice was bitter. "Do you know how many experimental treatments I've tried? How many specialists have promised breakthrough results? How many times I've gotten my hopes up only to—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I'm tired of chasing maybes." "But what if this time is different? What if it's not?" James met her eyes. "What if I go through 3 months of hell and come back exactly the same? What if I—" He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. "What if I come back and you're gone?" The words hung between them like a confession neither was ready to acknowledge. "James," Aurora said softly, "I'm your employee. When you no longer need care, don't." His voice was sharp. "Don't hide behind that job description, not anymore." Aurora looked away, her heart racing. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say what you're thinking when you look at me. I want you to say what's behind those careful smiles and professional boundaries. I want—" James stopped, his hands clenching in his lap. "God, Aurora, I want you to tell me I'm not imagining this." "Imagining what?" "This. Us. The way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. The way you stayed that first night when I had nightmares. The way you've made this house feel like—" He struggled for words. "Like home." Aurora's breath caught. "James, we can't—" "Why not?" "Because I work for you. Because you're vulnerable right now. Because when you get better, and you will get better, you'll remember who you are and who I am. And what? I'll suddenly forget that you're the strongest, most beautiful, most infuriating woman I've ever met. I'll forget that you see me. Not the wheelchair, not the money, not the broken pieces, but me. Aurora stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the garden. You don't understand the position this puts me in. I'm supposed to take care of you, not whatever this is. Then quit. She spun around. What? Quit your job, right now. Walk away from the employee-employer relationship and tell me, as Aurora Bennett to James Hayes, what you really feel. For a moment, Aurora saw her future balanced on a knife's edge. She could walk away, maintain her professional integrity, protect her heart from the inevitable hurt that came from loving someone above her station, or she could leap into the unknown and trust that the man who'd faced his fears to help her family might be worth the risk. I can't, she whispered. Something shuttered in James's expression. I see. No, you don't see. Aurora moved closer, her voice urgent. I can't quit because Melody needs stability. I can't risk my career on feelings that might disappear when you're walking again. I can't. You can't trust me. The simple statement hit like a physical blow. Aurora opened her mouth to deny it, then realized he was right. I trusted someone once, she said quietly. Melody's father figure after our parents died. Uncle Raymond. He promised to help us, promised we were family. Then he found out about Mama's medical debts and disappeared overnight. Left us with nothing but broken promises and eviction notices. James's expression softened. Aurora, so no, I don't trust easily. And yes, I'm scared that when you're walking again, when you remember what your life used to be like, you'll realize that the grateful patient's feelings for his caregiver were just proximity and gratitude. They sat in silence. The truth finally laid bare between them. The treatment in Denver, James said finally. If I go and if it works, would you be willing to find out what we could be? Without the job, without the power imbalance, without any obligations except what we choose. Aurora's heart hammered against her ribs. And if it doesn't work? James smiled, but it was sad and beautiful. Then I guess we'll find out if you can love a man who'll always need someone to trim his dead branches. As Aurora looked at him, really looked at him, she realized that James Hayes wasn't the same arrogant, broken man she'd met 5 months ago. He was someone who'd learned to tend gardens and mentor teenagers and offer comfort without expecting anything in return. But before she could answer, Melody came bursting through the garden door, her face flushed with excitement. Aurora, James, you'll never guess what just happened. She waved a letter in the air. I got into UC Davis, full scholarship, pre-veterinary program. And as Aurora hugged her sister, spinning her around while James applauded from his wheelchair, she realized that some questions would have to wait, but some risks might just be worth taking. The celebration dinner for Melody's scholarship acceptance should have been perfect, but Aurora couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to fall apart. They sat around the dining room table, a table that had gathered dust for 2 years before Aurora arrived, sharing take-out Chinese food and sparkling cider. Melody was practically glowing as she described her future plans, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. Dr. Martinez said I can start working with the large animal specialist right away, she was saying, gesturing with her chopsticks. And there's a study abroad program in Kenya where I could work with wildlife conservation. Can you imagine? Me in Africa helping save elephants. James smiled, but Aurora noticed the tension around his eyes. It sounds incredible, Melody. You'll do amazing things. And the best part, Melody continued, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult worry, is that UC Davis has family housing. Aurora, you could move with me. We could get a little apartment near campus and you could finally go back to school too. Finish your nursing degree like you always wanted. The silence that followed was deafening. Aurora set down her fork carefully. Melody, sweetie, we need to talk about practicalities. What practicalities? Melody's joy dimmed slightly. The scholarship covers everything. Room, board, tuition. And if you're not spending money on rent here, you could afford to go back to school. Aurora glanced at James, whose expression had gone carefully blank. It's not that simple. Why not? Melody looked between them, confusion clouding her features. James doesn't need a full-time caregiver anymore. Look at him. He's driving, he's working in the garden, She stopped, realization dawning. Oh, the word hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Oh, Melody repeated. But this time her voice carried understanding and something that might have been disappointment. You're not leaving because you don't want to leave him. Aurora felt heat rise in her cheeks. Melody, are you in love with him? The question was asked with the brutal honesty that only teenagers possess, cutting straight through all the careful pretenses adults construct. James leaned forward slightly, and Aurora realized he was waiting for her answer too. Aurora started, then stopped. How could she explain that love felt too small a word for what she felt? That James had become not just her employer, not just a man she cared for, but the person who made her feel like she could be more than just a caregiver, a sister, a survivor. Yes, she said finally, the word barely a whisper. Melody sat back in her chair, processing this information. "And you?" she asked James directly. "Are you in love with my sister?" James didn't hesitate. "Completely." "Then what's the problem?" Aurora almost laughed at the simplicity of the question. "Melody, it's complicated." "No, it's not." Melody's voice carried a maturity that reminded Aurora painfully of how much her sister had grown up too fast. "You love each other. He can take care of himself now. You should be together." "There's the treatment in Denver," James said quietly. 3 months of experimental therapy that might help me walk again." Melody frowned. "Might?" "The doctors say there's a 30% chance of significant improvement," Aurora explained. "But it would mean leaving Aurora," James finished. "And by the time I got back, she'd be in California with you." The pieces clicked into place for Melody. "So you'd rather stay paralyzed than risk losing her?" "Melody," Aurora gasped. But James answered honestly, "Yes." The simple word hit the room like thunder. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Melody said flatly. "Melody Elizabeth Bennett," Aurora started. "No, Aurora, it is stupid." Melody stood up, her young face fierce with conviction. "You taught me that love means wanting what's best for the other person, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. And right now you're both being selfish." Aurora and James exchanged glances, both taken aback by this unexpected lecture from a 17-year-old. "James," Melody continued, turning to face him, "you have a chance to walk again, to get your life back, and you're going to throw it away because you're scared she won't wait for you. That's not love. That's fear." James opened his mouth to respond, but Melody wasn't finished. "And Aurora," she said, whirling on her sister, "you're going to let him give up this opportunity because you're afraid he'll leave you anyway? You're making his choice for him based on your own insecurities." "It's not that simple," Aurora began. "Yes, it is." Melody's voice cracked with emotion. "Do you know what I've learned watching you two these past months? I've learned that real love isn't about being safe. It's about being brave enough to want the best for each other, even when it's scary." She paused, tears forming in her eyes. "And I've learned that the people who stay are the ones worth keeping." Aurora stayed with Mama during the worst of it. "She stayed with me when I was being impossible. And James," she looked at him directly, "you stayed in this house for 2 years, but the minute Aurora needed help, you faced your biggest fear and drove to my school." The silence stretched between them, heavy with truth. "So here's what's going to happen," Melody said, wiping her eyes but keeping her voice strong. "James is going to Denver for his treatment. Aurora is going to California with me, and she's going to finish her nursing degree like she always dreamed. And in 3 months, when James is hopefully walking again and Aurora is enrolled in school, they're going to figure out what their future looks like." "Melody," Aurora said softly, what if he doesn't get better? What if you don't find your way back to each other? What if? Melody shook her head. "Aurora, you raised me to believe that some things are worth the risk, that love is worth fighting for, even when the odds are bad." She looked between them, her expression softening. "And if it doesn't work out, at least you'll both know you tried. At least you'll both know you chose courage over fear." James was the first to speak. "She's wise, your sister." "Terrifyingly so," Aurora agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "So?" Melody crossed her arms. "Are you going to listen to the teenager, or are you going to keep being scared adults?" Aurora looked at James, seeing her own fear and hope reflected in his green eyes. The smart thing would be to play it safe, to stay in their comfortable routine, to avoid the risk of loss. But Melody was right. Love wasn't about being safe. "When does the Denver program start?" Aurora asked quietly. 2 weeks, James replied. "And when do you leave for California?" he asked Melody. "August 15th. 6 weeks. Aurora did the math. If James left for Denver in 2 weeks, he'd be there for 3 months. He'd return in early December, just as Melody would be finishing her first semester at UC Davis. "So we'd both be gone when you get back," Aurora said to James. "Yes, and you'd be returning to an empty house." James smiled, but it was sad and beautiful. "I'd be returning to a house full of memories of the best 6 months of my life." Aurora felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking but blooming. "Okay," she said. "Okay," James repeated. "Okay," Aurora said more firmly. "You go to Denver, I'll go to California with Melody, and in 3 months, we'll see what we're both made of," James finished. Melody grinned through her tears. "Now that's what I'm talking about." As they sat there in the soft light of the dining room, Aurora realized that this might be the last family dinner they'd share in this configuration. But instead of sadness, she felt something that might have been hope, because sometimes the only way to find out if love is real is to let it prove itself, even if it means letting go first. The morning James was scheduled to leave for Denver, Aurora woke up at 4 a.m. with the strange certainty that her heart was about to break in ways she'd never experienced before. She found him in the garden, sitting in his wheelchair among the roses they'd brought back to life together. The early morning mist clung to the petals like tears, and the sight of him there, so still, so beautiful in the pale light, made her chest ache with the weight of unspoken words. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. James turned to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I kept thinking about all the things I should have said, all the moments I should have been braver." Aurora settled onto the stone bench beside his chair, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Like what?" "Like telling you that the first time you smiled at me, really smiled, not that polite caregiver smile, I felt something I thought had died in the accident." James accepted the coffee, his fingers brushing hers in a contact that sent electricity up her arm. "Like telling you that watching you with Melody made me understand what family actually means." "James, let me finish," he said gently. "I need to say this before I lose my nerve." He turned his wheelchair to face her fully. "Aurora Bennett, you didn't just save my life. You gave me a reason to want it back." The words hung between them like a promise and a confession wrapped into one. "I have something for you," Aurora said, reaching into her pocket with trembling fingers. She pulled out a small envelope, weathered from being carried around for days while she worked up the courage to give it to him. James opened it carefully, his eyebrows rising as he read the contents. "Aurora, this is my resignation letter," she finished, "effective today. Mrs. Whitmore can handle the transition while you're gone, and when you come back," she took a shaky breath, "when you come back, I won't be your employee anymore." James stared at the letter, then at her. "Are you sure?" "I'm terrified," Aurora admitted. But Melody was right. Love isn't about being safe. It's about being brave enough to choose each other, even when you can't guarantee the outcome. Aurora. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I love you, not as my caregiver, not out of gratitude or proximity or any of the things you're worried about. I love you as the woman who sees dead roses and believes they can bloom again, as the person who makes me want to be better than I was before." Aurora felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you too, so much it scares me." "Then why does this feel like goodbye?" Aurora reached out and took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Because it is goodbye, to who we were, to the safety of defined roles and careful boundaries. When you come back from Denver, whether you're walking or not, we'll be different people. I'll be in school, figuring out who I am when I'm not just taking care of everyone else. You'll have faced whatever's waiting for you in that treatment program, and you think we might not find our way back to each other?" "I think," Aurora said carefully, "that we need to find out who we are separately before we can know who we are together." James lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You know what I realized last night?" "What?" "I spent 2 years in this garden watching everything die because I was too afraid to tend it. Then you came along and showed me that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the ruins of what came before." Aurora's breath caught at the poetry in his words. "So whatever happens in Denver, whatever you discover in California, I'm not going to be afraid anymore. I'm going to trust that what we've planted here is strong enough to survive a little distance and time." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reflected off the dewy roses around them. "The car will be here soon," James said eventually. "I know. Melody's probably wondering where you are. She's still asleep. Teenager privilege." Aurora managed a watery smile. "But she made me promise to wake her up before you leave. She wants to give you something." "What?" "A packet of chamomile seeds, for when you can't sleep in Denver." James laughed, and the sound was both joyful and heartbroken. "She's going to make an incredible veterinarian. She's going to make an incredible woman. You helped with that, you know, showing her that adults can be trusted to keep their promises." "Speaking of promises," James said, his voice growing serious. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you won't wait for me." Aurora's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't put your life on hold. Don't turn down opportunities or friendships or experiences because you're waiting for me to come back. Live, Aurora, fully, completely. Become the woman you're meant to be." "James, promise me," he insisted. "Because if you don't, I'll spend 3 months in Denver worried that I'm holding you back instead of focused on getting better." Aurora studied his face, seeing the love and determination there. "Only if you promise me the same thing. Fight for your recovery, not because you think I need you to walk, but because you deserve every chance at the fullest life possible. Deal." They shook hands solemnly. Then both started laughing at the absurdity of it. Two people desperately in love, making pacts to not wait for each other. "This is the weirdest relationship negotiation in history," Aurora said through her tears. "Good thing we're not normal people," James replied. A car door slammed in the distance, followed by the sound of wheels on gravel. The transportation to the airport had arrived. Aurora stood up, smoothing down her jeans with nervous hands. "I should get Melody." "Aurora." James caught her hand as she turned to go. "Whatever happens, these 6 months with you and Melody, they've been the best of my life." "Mine too." "And Aurora?" "Yeah?" James smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "I'll see you on the other side." Aurora nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She leaned down and kissed him, soft, sweet, and full of all the words they couldn't say. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Try to stop me," he whispered back. As Aurora walked toward the house to wake Melody, she heard James's wheelchair moving through the garden one last time. She didn't look back, but she could picture him saying goodbye to the roses, to the herbs, to all the growing things they'd nurtured together. And somewhere in her heart, she felt something that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite faith, but was strong enough to carry her through the months ahead. Love, she realized, wasn't just about holding on. Sometimes it was about being brave enough to let go. 6 weeks after James left for Denver, Aurora discovered that heartbreak could coexist with happiness in ways she never expected. She stood in the cramped kitchen of their Davis apartment, stirring spaghetti sauce, while Melody sat at their second-hand dining table, surrounded by veterinary textbooks and the controlled chaos of a pre-med student's life. Through the thin walls, she could hear their neighbor's baby crying and a television turned up too loud, but somehow these sounds of ordinary life felt like a symphony after months in the silent mansion. "Aurora, what's the difference between systolic and diastolic pressure again?" Melody called out, not looking up from her anatomy homework. "Systolic is when the heart contracts. Diastolic is when it relaxes," Aurora replied automatically. Her own nursing textbooks spread across the kitchen counter beside the stove. "Think of it like a garden hose. Systolic is when you squeeze the trigger. Diastolic is when you release it." Melody grinned. "Everything's a gardening metaphor with you now." Aurora felt a familiar ache in her chest at the mention of gardening, but it was gentler now, less like a wound, and more like the tender soreness of muscles that were growing stronger. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Mrs. Whitmore. "Mr. Hayes called to check on the roses. They're thriving. He sounds good, Aurora. Tired, but determined." Aurora smiled as she typed back, "Thank you for the update. Give them extra water this week. Supposed to be hot." It had been like this for 6 weeks. Careful indirect communication through Mrs. Whitmore. Updates without promises. Connection without commitment. It was both torture and relief. "Any word from James?" Melody asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Mrs. Whitmore says he's doing well with the therapy. Apparently he's the most stubborn patient they've ever had." "That tracks," Melody said with a laugh. Then, more seriously, "Do you miss him?" Aurora paused in her stirring. It was a question Melody asked at least once a week, and Aurora's answer was always evolving. "Every day," Aurora admitted, "but not in the way I expected." "What do you mean?" Aurora turned down the heat under the sauce and joined Melody at the table, pushing aside a stack of her own homework, pharmacology notes that seemed to multiply overnight. "I thought missing him would be this constant, desperate ache, like missing Mama was, but it's different." Aurora searched for the right words. "I miss him, but I also feel proud of him, and proud of myself. Does that make sense?" Melody nodded thoughtfully. "You mean like how I missed you when I started college, but I was also excited to see who I was becoming." "Exactly." Aurora reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. "Speaking of which, how are things with your study group?" Melody's cheeks flushed slightly. "Good. Really good, actually. And by really good, you mean, there's this guy, Carson. He's in my organic chemistry class, and he volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends, and Melody's smile was shy and radiant. He asked me to the fall dance. Aurora felt a surge of bittersweet joy. Melody, that's wonderful. Is it weird that I'm nervous? I mean, I've never really dated anyone seriously. It's not weird at all. And for what it's worth, any guy who volunteers with animals and can handle organic chemistry is probably worth getting nervous about. They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of how much had changed settling between them. 6 months ago, Melody had been an angry teenager acting out at school. Now she was a confident college student with friends, academic goals, and her first serious romantic interest. Aurora. Melody's voice was unusually hesitant. Yeah? I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to freak out. Aurora's stomach clenched. What is it? I've been thinking about what happens after this semester. About winter break. Okay. I don't think I want to go back to the Hayes mansion for Christmas. The words hit Aurora like a physical blow, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. Why not? Melody fidgeted with her pencil. Because I think you need to see James alone first. Without me there as a buffer. You need to figure out if what you have is real without worrying about taking care of me or making sure I'm okay. Aurora stared at her sister, amazed once again by her wisdom. Melody, I'm not saying I don't want to see James again. I love him, you know that. But Aurora, you've been taking care of me since I was 12, and now I'm 18. I'm in college. I have friends and a potential boyfriend and a whole life that doesn't revolve around you protecting me. Aurora felt tears prick her eyes. I know, but nothing. It's time for you to put yourself first. To figure out what Aurora Bennett wants when she's not being Aurora the caregiver or Aurora the sister. Melody's voice was gentle but firm. Besides, Carson invited me to spend Christmas with his family in Sacramento. They have a horse ranch. A horse ranch? I know, right? It's like the universe is conspiring to make my veterinary dreams come true. Aurora laughed through her tears. When did you become the adult in this relationship? Probably somewhere between James teaching me about soil pH and you showing me that it's okay to take risks for love. They were interrupted by Aurora's phone ringing. The caller ID made her heart skip. Denver Medical Center. Hello, Aurora answered, her voice carefully controlled. Aurora? It's James. Her breath caught. This was the first time they'd spoken directly since he left. James, hi. How are you? She could hear him searching for words. I'm calling because I needed to hear your voice. Is that okay? It's more than okay. Good, because I have news. Big news. Aurora gripped the phone tighter. What kind of news? The kind where I took 3 steps yesterday, unassisted. Aurora sank into her chair, one hand flying to her mouth. James. Oh my God. It's not a miracle, he said quickly. I'm still in the wheelchair most of the time. The doctors say it could be months before I can walk reliably, if ever. But, Aurora, I stood up. I walked 3 steps to the window and looked out at the mountains, and I thought of you. Tears were streaming down Aurora's face now. I'm so proud of you. Are you, even though it means everything's changing again? Aurora met Melody's eyes across the table. Her sister was grinning and giving her 2 thumbs up. Especially because everything's changing, Aurora said. James, I have news too. Tell me. I'm top of my class in pharmacology. I made the dean's list, and I got offered a work-study position at the campus medical center. Aurora, that's incredible. And she continued, her voice growing stronger, I've been thinking about what I want to do after I graduate. I want to specialize in rehabilitation nursing. I want to help people who are recovering from injuries like yours. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Aurora wondered if the call had dropped. James, are you there? I'm here, he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. God, Aurora, I'm so proud of you I can barely breathe. So we're both growing, Aurora said softly. Yeah, we are. And in 6 weeks, when you come back, in 6 weeks, we'll see who we've become. After they hung up, Aurora sat at the table feeling like her heart might burst from the strange combination of joy and uncertainty filling her chest. So, Melody prompted, how do you feel? Aurora considered the question seriously. Scared, excited, proud, hopeful. She paused. Like I'm becoming someone I never thought I could be. And is that someone who still loves James Hayes? Aurora smiled, thinking of the man who'd taken 3 trembling steps toward a window while thinking of her. That someone loves him more than ever, but differently, stronger. As they returned to their homework, Melody to her anatomy textbook, Aurora to her nursing notes, The apartment felt full of possibility. Outside their window, the California sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and somewhere in Denver, a man was learning to walk again, while a woman was learning to stand on her own. Growing apart, it turned out, could be another way of growing together. 3 weeks before James was scheduled to return, Aurora's world cracked open in a way she never saw coming. She was sitting in her advanced pathophysiology class, taking notes on spinal cord injuries with the kind of focused intensity that had made her a star student, when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Mrs. Whitmore. "Call me immediately. Emergency." Aurora's heart stopped. Emergency could only mean one thing. She slipped out of the lecture hall and called with trembling fingers. "Mrs. Whitmore, what's wrong? Is James okay?" "Aurora, dear?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice was strained. "There's been a complication with his treatment." The world tilted sideways. What kind of complication? "An infection at one of the nerve stimulation sites. It's serious, Aurora. He's in the ICU." Aurora sank onto a bench outside the medical building, her nursing training warring with her emotional panic. "How serious? What are his vitals? Who's his attending physician?" "Dr. Rodriguez is handling his care." "Aurora, I think you should know that James specifically asked that you not be contacted. He doesn't want you to worry about this." The words hit her like a physical blow. "He what? He made me promise not to tell you unless—" Mrs. Whitmore's voice broke. "Unless things got worse." And have they? Gotten worse? The pause that followed stretched into eternity. "He's been unconscious for 2 days." Aurora was on a plane to Denver 4 hours later. She'd left Melody with Carson's family for the weekend. Her sister had been visiting Sacramento anyway, and used every penny of her saved financial aid money to buy a last-minute ticket. As the plane lifted off from Sacramento, Aurora pressed her face to the window and prayed to whatever forces controlled fate that she wouldn't be too late. The ICU at Denver Medical Center was a sterile maze of beeping machines and whispered conversations. Aurora found James in room 314, and the sight of him knocked the breath from her lungs. He looked so small in the hospital bed, dwarfed by the ventilator and monitors surrounding him. His skin was pale, almost gray, and dark circles shadowed his closed eyes. But what broke her heart was how still he was. James, who had been learning to move again, reduced to absolute stillness. "Excuse me, ma'am." A nurse appeared at her elbow. "Are you family?" Aurora hesitated for just a moment. "I'm his, She stopped, realizing that all their careful definitions had crumbled in the face of this crisis. "I'm the person who loves him." The nurse's expression softened. "I'm Delilah. I've been taking care of him since he came in." "Are you Aurora?" "Yes. How did you—" "He talks about you. Even unconscious, he's been saying your name." Delilah checked James's chart, then looked at Aurora with kind eyes. The infection triggered a severe inflammatory response. His body was already stressed from the experimental treatments, and this pushed him over the edge. "Will he—" Aurora couldn't finish the question. "He's fighting, but it's touch and go." Aurora pulled a chair beside James's bed and took his hand, the same hand that had held hers in the garden 3 months ago. His fingers were warm but unresponsive. "James," she whispered, "I'm here. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." She stayed like that for 6 hours, talking to him about everything and nothing. About her classes, about Melody's boyfriend, about the roses Mrs. Whitmore said were still blooming at the mansion. She told him about the research paper she was writing on neuroplasticity in spinal cord patients. She told him about the clinical rotation she'd been offered at the rehabilitation hospital. She told him all the things she'd been saving to say when he came home. At midnight, Dr. Rodriguez, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with kind eyes, found Aurora still holding vigil. "Miss Bennett, I understand you're here against the patient's wishes." Aurora stiffened. "He's unconscious. He can't exactly enforce his wishes right now." Dr. Rodriguez smiled slightly. "Fair point. I'm not here to kick you out. I'm here because I need to understand something about James's medical history. His recovery rate before this setback was unprecedented, miraculous even. And I'm wondering if you might know why." "I don't understand." "James has been my patient for 3 months. I've watched him work harder than any patient I've ever treated. But when I ask him what's motivating him, he just says he has something to get back to. Someone to get back to." Dr. Rodriguez pulled up a chair beside Aurora. "I think that someone is you." Aurora felt tears she'd been holding back all day finally spill over. "He made Mrs. Whitmore promise not to tell me about this. He doesn't want me here." "With respect, Miss Bennett, I think you're wrong about that." "How can you say that? He specifically—" "Because," Dr. Rodriguez interrupted gently, When he was admitted to the ICU, he was clutching this. She handed Aurora a small piece of paper, worn soft from handling. Aurora unfolded it with shaking hands and gasped. It was her resignation letter, the one she'd given him the morning he left for Denver. The one that officially ended their professional relationship and opened the door to something real. He's been carrying it with him everywhere, Dr. Rodriguez continued. The nurses found it in his pocket when they brought him in. Whatever reasons he had for not wanting you contacted, it wasn't because he doesn't care about you. Aurora stared at the letter, remembering the morning she'd written it with trembling hands and given it to him with a heart full of hope and terror. He's protecting me, she realized suddenly. He doesn't want me to see him like this, doesn't want me to go through what I went through with my mother. Dr. Rodriguez nodded. That would be my professional assessment as well. But here's the thing about stubborn patients. Sometimes they need to hear from the people they're fighting for in order to remember why the fight is worth it. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, his vitals have been more stable since you arrived. Sometimes love is the best medicine we have. Aurora spent the night curled in the uncomfortable chair beside James's bed, holding his hand and whispering promises into the beeping darkness. She promised him that she'd graduate nursing school. She promised him that she'd be strong enough to handle whatever came next. She promised him that she wouldn't leave, no matter how hard he tried to protect her from his pain. At dawn, something changed. Aurora woke to the sound of James's breathing shifting, becoming less mechanical. She sat up, her heart pounding, and watched as his eyelids fluttered. "James?" she whispered. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then finding her face. For a moment, confusion clouded his features. Then recognition dawned, followed immediately by something that looked like panic. "Aurora?" His voice was hoarse from the ventilator. "What are you doing here?" "What do you think I'm doing here?" she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm exactly where I belong." James tried to sit up, but the effort exhausted him. "You shouldn't. I told them not to." "I know what you told them." Aurora squeezed his hand. "And I know why. But James, we made a promise to each other. We promised not to face things alone anymore. This is different," he said weakly. "You've seen enough people you love in hospital beds." "You're right. I have." Aurora leaned closer, her voice fierce with emotion. "And that's exactly why I know that the worst thing isn't being here. The worst thing is being somewhere else, wondering if I'll ever get the chance to tell you how proud I am of you, how grateful I am that you fought to walk again, how much I've missed you every single day." James stared at her, tears forming in his own eyes. "Aurora, and how much I love you," she finished. "Not because you can walk or can't walk, not because you're strong or vulnerable. I love you because you're you, James Hayes, in sickness and in health, even though nobody asked me to make that vow yet." James's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Yet?" Aurora felt her own smile break through her tears. "Well, a girl can hope." As James drifted back to sleep, peaceful this time, healing sleep, Aurora realized that sometimes the biggest risk wasn't letting someone go. Sometimes it was refusing to let them push you away when they needed you most. 3 weeks later, Aurora stood outside the Hayes mansion for the first time in 4 months, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched a black sedan pull into the circular driveway. James was coming home. The infection had set back his physical progress significantly, but in the strangest way, those 2 weeks in the Denver ICU had clarified everything that truly mattered. Aurora had taken a leave of absence from school to help with his recovery, a decision that had sparked their first real fight since the garden confession months ago. "You can't put your life on hold for me again," James had argued from his hospital bed, frustration making his voice sharp despite his weakness. "I'm not putting my life on hold," Aurora had shot back with equal fire. "I'm choosing what I want my life to include. There's a difference." "Aurora." "No, James. You don't get to decide what's best for me anymore. You don't get to protect me from making my own choices. I'm a grown woman, and if I want to defer 1 semester to help the man I love recover from a life-threatening infection, that's my decision to make." The fight had ended with James pulling her down for a kiss that tasted like hospital coffee and promises neither of them was ready to voice yet. Now, as the car door opened and Mrs. Whitmore emerged to help with luggage, Aurora held her breath. Then James appeared. He was using a walker, slow, careful steps that spoke of determination and countless hours of physical therapy. But he was walking, actually walking, under his own power, toward the front door of his home, toward her. "Aurora," he said when he reached the steps, his voice thick with emotion. "You're here. Where else would I be?" she replied, stepping forward to steady him as he navigated the 3 steps to the front door. "I can do it," he said gently, but without the bitter pride that used to characterize his independence. This was different, confidence born of hard-won progress rather than stubborn denial. Aurora stepped back, watching as James slowly but steadily climbed the steps that had once seemed insurmountable. When he reached the top, he turned to her with a smile that could have powered the entire mansion. "Welcome home," Aurora said softly. "It's only home because you're here," he replied. Inside, the house felt different, lighter somehow. Mrs. Whitmore had prepared a welcome lunch, and Melody had driven up from Davis for the weekend, bringing Carson to finally meet the man who'd become like family to her. As they sat around the dining room table, the same table where they'd shared Chinese takeout and Melody's college acceptance news, Aurora marveled at how much had changed. James moved more slowly now, and his strength was still rebuilding, but there was a peace in his movements that hadn't been there before. The desperate edge of someone fighting against their limitations had been replaced by the steady determination of someone working with them. "So," Melody said, grinning at Carson, "tell them about the proposal." Aurora's eyebrows shot up. "Proposal?" Carson blushed furiously. "It's not what you think. I mean, we're way too young for that kind of proposal. I propose that Melody and I start a mobile veterinary service after graduation, bringing medical care to rural areas that don't have easy access to animal hospitals." James leaned forward, interested. "That's a brilliant idea. What kind of funding would you need to get started?" As Carson launched into an enthusiastic explanation of their business plan, Aurora caught James's eye across the table. He was listening intently, but she could see the wheels turning in his mind, the same expression he'd worn when he'd offered to fund counseling programs at Melody's school. After lunch, as Melody and Carson explored the garden and Mrs. Whitmore bustled around organizing James's medical supplies, Aurora found herself alone with James in the living room for the first time since his return. "How does it feel?" she asked, settling beside him on the couch. "Being back?" James considered the question seriously. "Different. Better in some ways. I'm not the same person who left here 4 months ago." "Good different or scary different?" "Both." James reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers with the easy familiarity that had never quite left them. "Aurora, we need to talk about what happens next." Aurora's stomach clenched. "Okay. I've been thinking a lot about what I want my life to look like, what I want to do with the second chance I've been given." James turned to face her fully. "I want to establish a foundation for spinal cord research and recovery programs. I want to fund the kind of experimental treatments that gave me my mobility back, make them available to people who can't afford them." Aurora smiled. "James, that's incredible. I want to offer scholarships for nursing students who want to specialize in rehabilitation care. Students like you, like me, and I want to do it all with you, as my partner, in every sense of the word." Aurora's breath caught. "James, I know we said we'd figure out who we were separately first," James continued, his voice gaining strength. "And we did. You became a Dean's List nursing student with a clear career path and the strength to make your own decisions. I became a man who can walk away from business deals that don't serve a greater purpose. And," James smiled, the expression so full of love and certainty that Aurora felt her heart skip. "And I discovered that who I am separately is someone who chooses you. Every day, in every possible future I can imagine." Aurora felt tears welling in her eyes. "Are you asking you to marry me?" "Yes." James slid off the couch, moving slowly but deliberately to kneel on one knee beside her. From his pocket, he produced a simple platinum band set with a single perfect diamond. "Aurora Bennett, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me that's about more than just surviving? Will you help me turn this house into a home filled with the kind of love that grows things?" Aurora stared at the ring, then at James's face, seeing in his expression all the love and hope and determination that had carried them through months of separation and uncertainty. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, not from weakness but from emotion, Aurora realized that this moment wasn't just about them. It was about Melody, who'd learned that love meant wanting the best for someone, even when it was hard. It was about Mrs. Whitmore, who'd kept their roses alive through winter. It was about Dr. Rodriguez and Delilah, and all the people who'd believed in second chances. "Aurora!" Melody's voice came from the garden, followed by rapid footsteps. "Aurora, you have to see—" She burst through the French doors and stopped dead, taking in the scene before her. "Oh my God! Oh my God! We're engaged," Aurora said, laughing through her tears as Melody launched herself at them both. "I knew it, Carson. Get in here. They're engaged." As their small chosen family celebrated in the living room of the house that had once felt like a tomb, Aurora caught sight of the garden through the French doors. The roses were in full bloom, climbing toward the second-story windows just as they'd hoped they would. Some things, Aurora realized, were worth waiting for. Some things were worth fighting for. And some things, the very best things, were worth growing slowly, carefully, with patience and hope, and the kind of love that knew how to tend both the beautiful blooms and the necessary thorns. "So," James murmured in her ear, as Melody called everyone she knew to share the news, "what do you think? Ready to see what we can grow together?" Aurora looked at her ring, then at the man who'd learned to walk toward love instead of away from it, then at the garden where it all began. "Try to stop me," she said, echoing his words from that morning in the garden months ago. And as James kissed her, soft and sure and full of promises they'd finally learned how to keep, Aurora knew that the best part of their story was just beginning. 2 years later, the morning sun filtered through the French doors of what had once been called the Hayes Mansion, but was now simply known as home, casting golden light across the breakfast table where 3 generations sat sharing coffee and laughter. Aurora Hayes, she still felt a thrill every time she heard her married name, stood at the kitchen counter, preparing bottles for the newest addition to their family. 6-month-old Hope gurgled contentedly in her high chair, her dark eyes bright with curiosity, as she watched her mother move around the kitchen with the efficient grace of someone who'd learned to balance nursing school, marriage, and motherhood with surprising skill. "Mama, she's trying to eat her bib again," called 5-year-old David from his spot beside Hope's chair. The little boy had arrived in their lives 8 months ago through the county foster system, a scared, angry child who'd been through more homes than anyone should experience in a lifetime. Now he appointed himself Hope's protector, with the serious dedication of someone who understood what it meant to finally have a family worth protecting. "That's what babies do, sweetheart," Aurora said, moving to wipe Hope's face with a warm washcloth. "They explore the world by putting everything in their mouths." David wrinkled his nose. "That's gross." "David's right," James said from his position at the table, where he was reviewing applications for the Hayes Foundation's latest round of scholarships. "Babies are definitely gross. Good thing they're also adorable." James moved differently now than he had 2 years ago. The walker had been replaced by a walking stick, which he used on difficult days when his legs reminded him that recovery was an ongoing process, not a destination. But most mornings, like this one, he moved with only the slightest hesitation, the result of countless hours of physical therapy and a determination that had impressed even his doctors. "Speaking of adorable," Melody said, bursting through the garden doors with dirt under her fingernails and joy radiating from every pore, "wait until you see what Carson and I planted yesterday." At 21, Melody had grown into the confident young woman Aurora had always hoped she'd become. She was in her final year of veterinary school, engaged to Carson, and spent her weekends helping maintain the extensive gardens that had become Aurora and James's shared passion. "Let me guess," James said with a grin. "More roses. Better fruit trees, apple, pear, and cherry. In 10 years, Hope and David will be able to climb them and eat fresh fruit right off the branches." Aurora felt that familiar flutter in her chest that happened whenever she thought about the future they were building, not just for themselves, but for the children who'd found their way into their hearts and home. "Uncle Carson's here," David announced, spotting the familiar pickup truck pulling into the driveway. Carson had officially become family 6 months ago when he'd married Melody in a small ceremony in the garden, surrounded by roses and the people who mattered most. He'd also become David's favorite person, largely because he had an inexhaustible supply of animal facts and the patience to answer a 5-year-old's endless questions about why horses sleep standing up and whether dolphins really talk to each other. "Perfect timing," James said, standing and reaching for his walking stick. "I wanted to talk to him about the mobile vet clinic funding proposal." The Hayes Foundation had grown beyond James's wildest expectations. What had started as a personal mission to fund spinal cord research had expanded into scholarships for nursing students, grants for innovative medical programs, and support for young entrepreneurs with dreams of serving underserved communities. Like Carson and Melody's mobile veterinary service, which now operated 3 trucks bringing medical care to rural areas across Northern California. "Before you disappear into business talk," Aurora said, intercepting James with a kiss that still made her heart skip after 2 years of marriage, "remember we have the appointment with Dr. Kim at 3. James's expression sobered slightly. Dr. Kim was their fertility specialist, the woman who'd been helping them navigate the complex journey of trying to expand their family. Hope's arrival had been a surprise, a beautiful, life-changing surprise that had come just as they'd begun exploring adoption options for siblings for David. "I remember," James said softly. "Whatever she tells us today, we'll handle it together." "Together," Aurora agreed. As their morning unfolded, Carson arriving with a new injured owl that needed rehabilitation, David helping Melody transplant seedlings, Hope taking her first tentative tastes of solid food, Aurora found herself pausing in the garden doorway, watching the controlled chaos of their life with wonder. 2 years ago, she'd been a single woman working as a caregiver, convinced that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. James had been a broken man who'd given up on the possibility of meaningful connection. David had been a frightened child bouncing between foster homes. Hope hadn't even been conceived yet. And now they were a family, imperfect, complicated, sometimes loud, always growing. "Penny for your thoughts," James said, joining her in the doorway. "Just thinking about how much has changed." "Good changes?" Aurora leaned into his warmth, watching David carefully show Hope how to pet the injured owl Carson was examining. "The best changes. Even when it's hard. Even when David has nightmares, or Hope keeps us up all night, or the foundation board meetings run until midnight." Aurora smiled. "Especially then. Easy things don't teach you anything. Hard things that are worth it. They teach you everything." James was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her waist. "I have something to tell you." "Good something or scary something?" "Good something, I think." James turned to face her. "Dr. Rodriguez called yesterday from Denver." Aurora's stomach clenched. Dr. Rodriguez only called when there were developments in James's case. Sometimes good, sometimes concerning. "The experimental treatment I underwent, the one that helped me regain mobility, they want to turn it into a standard protocol. They want to use my case as the foundation for a new rehabilitation center." "James, that's incredible. In Denver," he continued, "they want me to consult on the design, the patient programs, the funding structure. It would mean 6 months of traveling back and forth, maybe relocating temporarily." Aurora felt the familiar fear clench in her chest, the old terror of plans changing, of stability being threatened. But then she looked at their life around them. David teaching Hope how to clap, Melody and Carson debating soil composition for the fruit trees, Mrs. Whitmore emerging from the house with a pitcher of fresh lemonade. This wasn't a fragile thing that could be broken by distance or change. This was a family, a love, a life they'd built strong enough to weather whatever came next. "When do we leave?" she asked. James blinked. "We? Did you think I'd let you do this alone? David's portable, homeschooling gives us flexibility, Hope travels well, and I could do my final clinical rotations at Denver General." "Aurora, you don't have to—" "I know I don't have to," Aurora interrupted, echoing the conversation they'd had in his hospital room 2 years ago. "I want to. I want to be part of changing how we treat people with spinal cord injuries. I want our children to see their parents building something meaningful together." James stared at her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed, the kind of joyful, unguarded laughter that had become his trademark since learning to be happy. "What's so funny?" "I spent 2 years learning to walk again," James said, pulling her closer. "But you're the one who taught me how to run toward the future instead of away from it." As evening settled over their garden, the family gathered around the outdoor table for dinner. David insisted on sitting between Hope's high chair and the owl's recovery cage, appointed guardian of both. Melody and Carson shared stories from their latest rural clinic adventure. Mrs. Whitmore served her famous pot roast while pretending not to tear up at the sight of the family she'd watched grow from broken pieces into something beautiful. "I have an announcement," Aurora said as they finished dessert, her hand finding James's under the table. Everyone turned to look at her expectantly. "Dr. Kim called with some news today." James squeezed her hand, and she saw hope and nervousness warring in his expression. "She said that sometimes, when people stop trying so hard to control everything and just focus on building a loving home—" Aurora paused, savoring the moment. "Sometimes biology finds a way." It took a moment for her words to sink in. Melody gasped first. "Aurora, are you—" 12 weeks, Aurora confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. due in spring right around the time the cherry trees should bloom. The celebration that followed was loud and joyful, and exactly what Aurora had dreamed of during all those quiet years when she thought family was something that happened to other people. Later, as they tucked David into bed and settled Hope in her crib, James found Aurora sitting in the garden, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Happy?" he asked, settling beside her on the stone bench where they'd shared their first real conversation. "Overwhelmed, grateful, terrified, excited." Aurora leaned against his shoulder. "All of it. That sounds about right for us." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the garden they'd brought back to life together. In the distance, they could hear Melody and Carson talking quietly on the front porch, probably planning their next adventure. Mrs. Whitmore was humming in the kitchen as she finished the evening dishes. David's nightlight glowed softly from his bedroom window. "James? Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't taken this job? If Mrs. Whitmore had hired one of the other 13 caregivers instead?" James considered the question seriously. "I think," he said finally, "that we would have found each other eventually. Maybe not here, maybe not like this, but somehow. Some connections are too strong to be left to chance." Aurora smiled, thinking of the long path that had led them to this moment. The pain, the fear, the careful steps toward trust, the leap of faith that had brought them together. "I love you, James Hayes. I love you too, Aurora Hayes. Today, tomorrow, and all the days we haven't imagined yet." As they stood to go inside, Aurora took one last look at the garden that had been the beginning of everything. The roses climbed the mansion walls now, reaching toward the stars, their blooms full and fragrant in the night air. Some things, she thought, were worth waiting for. Some things were worth the risk. And some things, the very best things, grew slowly, patiently, with love and hope, and the kind of faith that believed in new beginnings, even when the ground looked barren, especially then. The end. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin not with a dramatic meet-cute, but with someone choosing to stay when staying is hard. Aurora and James didn't find each other. They grew each other, season by season, choice by choice, until they became the people worthy of the love they'd dreamed of. Because true love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth growing with. What did you think of Aurora and James's journey? Have you ever experienced love that grew slowly, like roses in a garden? We'd love to hear your thoughts about second chances, chosen family, and the kind of love that blooms through patience and time. Your participation on this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.